Welcome back, everyone. He is a 6-time World Series of Poker bracelet winner, 2-time World Poker Tour champion, a diehard fantasy hockey player. It is my pleasure to welcome Kid Poker himself, one of the most dominant players of his generation, Daniel Negreanu. Daniel, it's a pleasure to have you on, my friend. How you doing?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. My favorite thing to talk about by far is fantasy hockey, so much so that I annoy people, right? Like nobody wants to hear my fantasy hockey bad beats, but it feels good to be able to tell them. So let's do that.
All right, yeah, we'll commiserate together, and that's sort of where I want to start because, of course, your background, you're famous for what you've accomplished in poker, but I want to start with hockey because you're obviously a massive diehard. That's why I kind of got on my radar that you're a big fantasy player. But where did your love of just hockey in general start? Is it being a fan as a kid? Is it playing? Did you play organized hockey, or just where did it come from?
Well, being a kid growing up in Toronto, hockey's a big part of the culture. And I remember like bleeding blue and white. I remember crying as a 6, 7-year-old, crying a lot, right? Because, the Maple Leafs back then gave you a lot to cry about. And of course, the era of Rick Vive is where I started to become a fan. And then, Wendell Clark was like my hero. And, that era was when I really started to get into hockey. And through that, just becoming more interested. And I was actually, back then, I was interested in a lot of sports. Whereas today, I'm pretty much just a hockey guy because when you're a kid, you got a lot more time. But now, now I'm pretty much just a hockey diehard.
Okay, so does that mean, are you part of the 93 heartbreak generation? That's my generation. I was 10 when that game happened, with the Gretzky high stick and Carey Fraser. Is that sort of your most memorable, devastating moment as a kid?
Was that the most memorable? I think so, because before that, it was just a lot of losing, right?
Yeah.
But that was the first time where we had a team where it felt like, wow, we're actually quite good. We got Felix Potvin in net. Let's go.
So obviously your background's poker and everything like that, snooker, cards, poker, whatever like that. But is that kind of what attracted you to fantasy hockey in the first place? Kind of just like games of probability?
So I've always been a stats nerd to the point where before video games offered the opportunity where you could just like play a baseball game and it gives you stats, I did it by hand. My mom was like, what are all these papers, right? And I had all these papers of stats that I would track myself as I played video games. I even created like little tournaments of my own with little wrestlers that I had. So this was innate in me, stats, numbers, all this kind of stuff. So, before fantasy hockey really existed, I think, in the mainstream, I was in a league and I have been with the same guys since 1996. And it's the most fun thing I do of like anything. And I spend thousands and I'm going to get thousands of hours on this league. And it's just time well spent.
What was fantasy hockey websites like back then? Or was it like hand track? Like what was that back then?
Well, we created our own, right? We created what's called the Alternative Hockey League, right? Which is 20 owners, 5 divisions. We play head to head, but on nights when there's 6 or more hockey games. But back then, in order to input our lineups, we had to leave a message on a voice recorder. So like we had to phone somebody and he had a recorder and he's like, put your lineups in here, right? Because there was no like, yeah. And I remember I had AOL dial-up the first time I had a computer, and like the main web page, like I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have it start downloading. I'd go have breakfast and I'm like, oh, okay, it's almost done. Like half the page downloading, and then you'd hear.
Oh yeah, of course.
No, I want to see how I did last night. Yeah. And then we would also phone, I think it was the Score back then, before the Score was the Score, where, you would like watch this TV channel to see scores and see who would score, or phone a hotline. So yeah, we've come a long way since the late 90s era.
No kidding.
That's right. I remember it was Headline Sports before it was even the Score, because I'm a Toronto guy as well. So I remember it very well. So Daniel, I've been dying to ask you this question specifically. I'm just so curious about how poker translates to fantasy hockey. Are there any skills you've gained from your career that you can actually apply to get better at fantasy hockey? And the example I had was like, can a fantasy hockey player have a tell? Because it's not like you can read them at the table and it affects the NHL player performance. But if there's any example like that, something you applied from poker to fantasy hockey.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why specifically, because what we do is we do sort of auction style during the free agent draft. But as a poker player, one of the things that you're comfortable with is numbers, statistics, math. So looking at underlying numbers, not just seeing like, oh, this guy scored 6 goals. But how has he done that? Oh, he had 9 shots and scored 6 times. Okay, probably not going to be able to keep that up. So a poker player innately is going to be good at that. As far as the auction aspect, what we do typically is, we have contracts. It's a keeper league, of course. I have Jack Hughes until he's 34 years old. He is going to be on my team till he's 34. For real. I was like, I'm all in on Jack Hughes. But part of what we do sometimes is, let's say, for example, there's a free agent available, like a Sidney Crosby. He's going to be out there in the market. So getting a sense of how much somebody's willing to spend, right, of their budget. So you start to see they bid and they're like, okay, they one up you. They say 15, you say 16. Getting a sense of like how much they're willing to go. And because you know how it works in an auction league, for those that don't know, is the more somebody spends on somebody, the better it is for you. However, if sometimes you might get stuck with a guy, if you're just playing games and bluffing, you could get stuck with the player and go, what? I don't want Blake Wheeler for 20. No, let's cancel. It's too late.
Yeah, for sure.
See, this is my first year doing an auction league, and I kind of baited this one guy into picking McDavid and Matthews, which in most pools would be great, but he blew most of his budget. Where he ended up having to pick Milan Lucic at like the 4th or 5th pick, mostly because we were just thrown out there, and he needed players to kind of make that up. So auction leagues are fun; they're also dangerous. So, do you play in any high stakes fantasy hockey leagues?
So the truth is, for me, it's not about the money. Okay, at all. It hasn't been. The league that I'm in since 1996 was a $60 buy-in. A few years ago, we kicked it up to $150, right? Which is like nothing. And within that league, we create leagues within the league. Like I do every Tuesday night, so there's 20 teams in the league. Every Tuesday night, the lowest scoring team are eliminated. So it's survivor night. And if you had the highest score, you get the immunity puck for next week. So you're safe. So we do a lot of fun stuff within that. But again, it's not about the money. It's always just been about the bragging rights. And, I've got 3 AHL titles since 1996 out of 20, which is second most. And I've made it to the finals 2 years in a row. But this is the year, guys. My team went through a 3-year rebuild, and I'm ready. This is the time.
I'm jealous. This league sounds awesome. No wonder I haven't been able to get you to join ours, because this is fun. And like Tuesdays sound really hardcore. Like I'd be nervous all day getting ready for the Survivor format. That's outstanding. I love it. I wanted to ask you as well, Daniel, just about the Vegas Golden Knights, because I know you are a very vocal proponent of just getting them there in the first place, and you've been passionate just in your tweeting and talking a lot about the team since they've arrived. I always thought of you as like the most perfectly qualified Golden Knights fan, because you're the perfect merger of the two worlds, right? Poker, Vegas, and hockey and fanhood coming from Toronto. So I'm curious, just what has your experience been like in this first half decade, and just seeing the team rise up, and has the fanhood changed for you since that first crazy year?
Unfortunately, a lot has changed here. I mean, it was a storybook Cinderella thing, right? Where, people were writing pieces about the Golden Knights saying that this would be epically the worst team in history, right? Like there was a Deadspin article that showed all the reasons why it would be the worst team in history. Not only were we not the worst, we won the division, we went to the finals, had a real chance, to win against Washington, and it didn't come through. But then what happened? It seemed like the entire league and everybody was kind of rooting for us, except those that were jealous. Oh, the same people that were saying it's going to be the worst team in the league saying, not fair, the rules gave you guys a great team. I'm like, you didn't think so at the start of the season.
Yeah.
But what this team proved, is like with a coach that they believe in, which was Gerard Gallant, and a group of misfits who all have something to prove. And there's really less, it's less about ego. It's less about anybody sticking out. The way in which the team's payroll and structure is kind of, across the board pretty similar. And then you have at the forefront, you have Marc-Andre Fleury, the most likable hockey player in the world. Like he just is. Like everybody loves Fleury. He's a glue guy, not about his ego. He keeps the locker room fun and whatnot. And I remember that first year when we got Ryan Reeves, this wasn't a tough team. And they brought Ryan Reeves in the first game. He's like knocking out 4 guys, taking a 15 minutes and misconduct penalties, and everyone in the crowd's going, wait a minute, what was this? What's going on here? He settled in a couple games in, and he also became part of the glue. What happened with that glue and that core, the nucleus, the most beloved players on that team were shipped away unceremoniously in really kind of like, I guess, ways that really upset the fan base. First it was Gerard Gallant, who, just took his team to the playoffs 2 years in a row, was scheduled to be the all-star coach. And then they lost 4 games in a row, and you chopped the head off Gallant. You're like, whoa, wait a minute. And then, of course, you have, the whole Fleury debacle, with bringing in DeBoer, who was, a guy who was at odds with Gallant. And then, the most popular players in Alex Tuck, Nate Schmidt. I mean, literally, if you go down the list of like, who sells the most jerseys, they're next up on the block, right? So the team changed. No longer was it this team of misfits. Now all of a sudden you're bringing in $10 million players like Mark Stone, Max Pacioretty, Pietrangelo, and then of course the big Jack Eichel deal. So it's completely changed, and I think a lot of fans are just upset with how things have rolled out. They've struggled last year through injuries, and that's obviously part of it. But you also traded for a guy who was going to be out till February. So you sort of took that on your own. You have to take responsibility for that as well.
So you'll see kind of these famous bad beats at the poker table, but do you have any memorable bad beats playing fantasy hockey?
Oh, so many bad beats. Okay, I'm just going to tell you this year. This year, my team on average scores the most of anyone in the league. I'm number 1. Okay, so there's 20 teams in the league, right? Now, I've had, so in our league, 3. So basically 2.91 goals scored against, right? Myself and 4 other teams in the league average that or better, right? But against me, all the drudges of the world, they just seem to score in bunches. So like, I've had real bad luck on those nights. You know, and obviously losing the finals 2 years in a row. But yeah, that like, it's silly to say, but like, I get more emotionally invested with fantasy hockey bad beats than poker, because like poker is what I do for a living, you know. But fantasy hockey, like you see sometimes, I had one. This was the one. I can't even remember the name, but I had like Crosby. This was this year. Crosby, Robertson, Hughes, and like 5-6 guys like that against the guy whose lineup was like his best. He was a bad team. His best player was like Thomas Novak in Nashville. Okay. And like, I had all my guys going, all I needed was an assist, and they all got blanked. And it was like, he figured out the odds. I think someone figured out the odds because we're math nerds. And it was something like 7 million to 1.
Oh, man. Oh, wow. I feel it. As someone who just lost his fantasy football championship because of Nick Foles, because Nick Foles, he got negative points, and that made a different team make the final, and then I lost to that team instead of the team that should have been going to the final. I know what that feels like. I had a bad beat in 2013 where I was trying to flip the assists category in the final, and I dropped Andy McDonald. No, I dropped Jonathan Huberdeau for Andy McDonald. Jonathan Huberdeau got 2 assists on the final day of the season, and I lost assist by 1. So I cost myself a championship. Andy McDonald, if you're out there, you cost me a championship. Still sticks with me.
Bad management. That's all on you.
Yeah.
Own that.
Yeah.
I know, you're right. It is. It's on. I got to own it forever.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Daniel, about the poker boom, because people talk about it, going back to Chris Moneymaker in the early 2000s, but there's also this tie-in I find, especially in Canada, because during the 04-05 lockout, of course, like TSN networks like that started airing a lot more poker to sort of fill the time. And then there was this huge uptick in poker interest. I noticed, being a Canadian university student at the time. And I'm curious, what was it like to experience that on your end? And is it fair? Do you think there was a poker boom during the lockout? And just any experiences you could share from that time?
Yeah, on a personal level, it was massive for me because I played a tournament before the lockout where the entire tournament I'm on TV and I was wearing a Maple Leafs jersey, right? So like, it's nonstop on Sportsnet and all the networks, and they're like constantly showing that because obviously there's no hockey to watch. And I think a lot more people are at home twiddling their thumbs thinking of what to do. And then I think for obviously a lot of Toronto fans and seeing me in that jersey was like, oh wait, we got to root for that guy, right? Because he's the Canadian. But I definitely think specifically in Canada, that lockout led to it was happening anyway globally, but in Canada, it's only emphasized even more so by the fact that people's eyeballs on the networks that they typically watch hockey are being inundated with poker.
Mm-hmm.
So now that there's an NHL team in Vegas, and obviously the last couple of years, do players ever come to you for poker or any card game advice?
There's only one who's been a buddy of mine ever since he played for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that's Phil Kessel. Right, he's playing here, for the Vegas Golden Knights right now, and he loves to play Pot Limit Omaha and stuff like that. And we talk hands and stuff like that and strategy. And it's kind of like his poker is very similar to his hockey in that he's very streaky. I mean, if you look at him career-wise, like he gets into his head sometimes where if he's like, in a just not, hitting a lot of posts and stuff, he's like, bro, I can't catch a break. I can't win a pot. And then he'll say the same about poker. So there's a lot of similarities in the way that he approaches it, but he's very resilient. Like he finds a way. Obviously his start here in Vegas hasn't been ideal. He's sort of been, kind of on the third line, but sort of with different line mates every game and, struggling, to sort of fit into the system as of yet. But I know he's a resilient guy, and he's a guy that I'm happy to have here. He actually makes it easier to root for the team, just having him on there. For sure.
And I'm with you, Daniel. I've sort of been viewing the Vegas Golden Knights as the team that kind of treats players like cattle, is how I put it in recent years. So I feel for any fan of the Golden Knights. It's probably harder to cheer for them now than it was in the past. Daniel, I think that's it for today, but Thank you so much for coming on. It's awesome. I've been wanting to talk fantasy hockey with you for a long time. And maybe you're still my white whale. I'll try to get you into the LAR Canada Hockey League one of these years. But for now, enjoy what sounds like an awesome
You know
league.
what? Send me the rules now, and I'm going to prepare, and I'm going to study for it so I can dominate your league. I want to know what guy. You're not using penalty minutes, are you?
No, we're not. No, we got rid of them years ago. No,
That
we're
is
banger.
dumb.
We're hits.
Like here.
blocks.
Oh, my guy did something stupid. Here's a couple points for you. No,
Exactly, right. You don't want to reward that. So I'm with you. If that's a selling point, I'm gonna send you the categories.
please do. All right.